All right, Ben, thanks for sitting in with me. Ben is working with us this summer as part of his internship with Southeastern Seminary. So glad to have you here, Ben. So
Glad to be here.
he didn't know that part of internship duties might be to sit in and do a video, but kind of worked out. And we asked you to look at the movie Raya, The Last Dragon, I think.
And The Last Dragon.
And The Last Dragon.
Yeah.
So this is the latest Disney movie. I watched it earlier this week, and since we told you about it, you watched it. And I guess basically, summary of this, they live in a land that's been divided to 5 different clans. But unknown to them, there's this one gem that keeps the drones at bay. These evil things that turn people to stone. And when this gem gets broken up due to greed and mistrust among the clans, they get scattered. The drones take over. People are getting destroyed. Civilization is getting wiped out. But there's a dragon that gave all the powers into the stone. And all the dragons are destroyed except one dragon. So Raya is the heroine in this movie. She finds the last dragon, finds all the pieces of the gem, and just for it to get united, there's this crisis of not trusting one another between some of the clan members involved. Point of the story is, and spoiler alert, is that they have to trust one another. The very thing that's hard for them to do, to be able to reunite the gems. Once that happens, then all the dragons are released and everyone turned to stone, comes back to life. The drones go away. Everyone lives happily ever after, united now as one people instead of 5 different tribes.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's basic summary, right?
Yes, that sounds about right.
All right. So, interesting movie. It is making the scenes. Those people with preschoolers probably have watched this multiple times already. So, we just want to discuss it a little bit. I always want to kind of talk about how things point to Christ, how things don't point to Christ. And so, Ben, what are some things you liked about the movie, or maybe how it pointed to Christ or the kingdom?
Well, I mean, I think one fundamental thing that you don't get often a lot, especially in children's entertainment, is there's one line where Raya is explaining how everything fell apart, how everything got divided, and she says, "It's people being people." Like, it's talking about greed and just this kind of self-seeking nature of everyone, and you don't often hear children's movies say that human beings are fundamentally bad or fundamentally evil.
Yeah.
But that's the source of the conflict in the film.
Yeah, I was kind of surprised. I mean, they had these little drone, which are the dark, shadowy clouds, I guess. Really ambiguous. But it was pretty clear they represented sin. I think they mention that these drones exist because of the greedy nature of mankind, not trusting with one another. Never say the word sin, but they pretty well identify it, very figuratively, powerfully. So yeah, I was kind of surprised that they talked about. I mean, in fact, it seemed to be more about that. And these things are ruining families, broken up families. There's so many orphans that are out because their families have turned to stone because of drone, because of mistrust and sinfulness, or they never use that word, but the me first mentality. So I thought it did an excellent job of kind of giving us self-analysis of the world we live in and saying, hey, it's because of us that's causing that. So yeah, I agree with you. That was pretty interesting. Any other echoes of the kingdom you saw?
Just thinking about it. I think fundamentally, when we're talking about like what our role and our mission is as the church, and you preached this last Sunday on reconciliation, and just the fact that we don't. I mean, I think one of the final conflict points is that there's had to be an element of trust between the hero and the villain in the film, and like we just don't do that. And I think that's the fundamental point of division in the church, is that we want to do things our way. We can't trust anyone else
Yeah.
To do things the way that we want them to.
Right.
So yeah, fundamentally, I think that there's a recognition that, like, in the film, it's not something we can do by ourselves. And I
Right.
think as Christians, we should recognize that we need each other. Christians are not lone animals; we're pack animals.
Right.
We need each other to properly carry out the mission that we've been entrusted with.
That's good. The other thing I liked about the cartoon is there was this prevailing longing all throughout. In a broken world where people turn to stone, there is an ever-present longing for something else, believing that this society could be better, that they could be united, and that someday sad things will become untrue. Someday Papa won't be a stone, he'll be coming back to life. And so it's this like plea for resurrection, if you will. And so I can identify with that longing that is in a broken world, and I think that's very much what's talked about in the New Testament, is this longing for redemption. So I appreciate that. Let me ask you this question. I think this is a good question to ask in anything you watch. Which character was most Christian or acted most Christ-like? Did you see anybody that acted Christ-like?
I mean, of course, I think the obvious answer would be Raya and her quest to kind of undo everything that had gone wrong. And of course, that's what Christ did on our behalf. Christ came to the world for the purpose of undoing undoing the fall, undoing sin, undoing what had happened that messed everything up. Like, that was his purpose.
Yeah.
I think that's the obvious one. I can't really think of anyone else.
Yeah, I would say, I would add maybe the dad, Raya's dad, in that anytime someone sacrifices their self for the benefit of someone else, he was the one that kind of put the seed in her life. So the father commissioned it, so to speak, and then at the moment when he knew he couldn't escape, not everyone could escape, he found a way to make sure she escaped at his own expense and turning to stone. So anytime I see, often the hero in a movie becomes the hero because they sacrifice themselves. So in that way, you've got kind of a figure of Christ. And in some ways, as you said, Raya, not only in the pursuit of it, but then in the climax of it, she's the one who shows the way by sacrificing herself. Interesting enough, because the other girl, I don't know her name, but she's always kind of the villain. But it's like in the end, she's the one that becomes persuaded, seems to be the object of the trust. So it's kind of turns the audience's head a little bit on that when you just kind of don't want to like her, but they make it so the villain isn't completely a villain, which is interesting. It's a little different for most movies. So, anything else you liked about it? Because I want to turn it quickly.
Not that I can think of.
All right. So then, the lie. It's not the gospel.
Yeah.
It can echo it, it can point to it, but in the end, I think we got to look at what is the lie, what's given that's not true. So what is it that you would say?
I think the movie carried the presumption that all we need to make things right is like what we have in ourselves.
Yeah. Exactly.
We just have to stop being greedy. We just have to stop doing this, stop doing that, and everything will be fine. And while that's true, if we stopped, being selfish, things would be a lot better. But there's nothing intrinsic within us that compels us to stop being selfish in our own nature.
Yeah. We are the heroes. We are the saviors. The salvation of the world lies within ourselves, which is typical of a society that doesn't want to acknowledge God or to lift up and exalt self. And so in some ways it becomes the anti-gospel, where instead of depending on Christ, we go back to ourselves. It kind of reminded me of the Tower of Babel, where they want to make a name for themselves, they want to be secure, and so they look to what we can do, and they start building this massive building for their own significance, and it's kind of like, all right, that's the Tower of Babel. God comes down, looks down at the efforts of man, and brings confusion. And so it kind of reminded me of like, this is the modern parable of the Tower of Babel, of self-reliance, and making that happen. One question I asked the kids, not really expecting an answer, just wanting to kind of expose something. There's this end scene where everyone walks off happily ever after, and the 5 clans are united as one nation in this utopia where people trust one another. And it's like, okay, that sounds great. But then I asked the question, I was like, that sounds good, but what happens when the next person lies? Or what happens when someone does something untrustworthy? And what I was trying to bring about in asking that question is they didn't really address the sin problem. They just said, okay, we can trust one another, but there was nothing ever presented in the movie to ensure that they would always be trustworthy. So at best, it's kind of like, here's a temporary Band-Aid. Because mankind can't fix the problem of mankind. We don't have it within ourselves. It has to be outside of ourselves to fix what's going on inside. So that was kind of like one of my thoughts and questions, just to kind of bring it to that. So, but you probably didn't prepare for this, but say a young family asks you, hey, should we watch this? What would you say?
I would say definitely, because it, unlike, like, obviously it didn't fully preach the gospel, of course. It's not going to do that. It wasn't intended to do that. But it did at least ask the right question.
Yeah.
Which is something that not a lot of films do.
Sure.
Most films start with the presumption that, humans are just generally good. We just, we do bad things in bad circumstances. But this one, even though it didn't answer the question the right way, it still asked the question that most films don't ask.
Right.
So I would recommend it just because of that. Of course, we still have to talk through and decide, figure out like the gospel parallels and anti-gospel things in there. But generally, it does a whole lot more than most films do.
Yeah. I would say watch it so that you could have that discussion. Mm-hmm. Now, if your children are maybe too young to have that discussion, even on basic elements, I was like, well, you might want to hold off. Because you need to watch it with this discussion of what's the lie. Mm-hmm. Can the children comprehend in that discussion? You know what? Trusting yourself can't get you that far. We've got to go and trust the Lord in it. So if you can have a discussion like that, then yeah, I think it'd be good. And you don't have to be too old to have that discussion. So that'd be my only qualifier is like, watch it, but make sure you have the discussion with your children so that they see where the lie is and not just have power because they don't recognize the lie. So yeah, thanks for your comments, Ben. Appreciate your watching it, having to watch it again. And if there's ever any movies you guys want us to talk about, especially if families are watching, it's kind of like a side hobby for 2 or 3 of us to watch it and then talk about it and try to figure out how things point to the gospel or not. So guys, take care and enjoy it. Thanks.